So my topic is the humanitarian crisis in Venezuela. It's said that the Venezuela migration crisis may become the world's largest crisis by 2020. Um, and my name is Nicole Brown. I'll be presenting this topic. And just before starting, so this is like the border, and we can see a lot of people fleeing the country trying to gain access into, I believe this was in Colombia, and this was just on one specific day in the morning. Okay, so before talking about the current crisis situation, so this crisis not didn't actually start with the Maduro regime, but during it can go way back to even Chavez, especially since he made Venezuela such a dependent petro state. And he didn't really have that great of social or economic policies, kind of creating the Venezuela that we see today that only worsened under the Maduro regime. So currently about 5 million Venezuelans have fled. Now this is due to violence, lack of food, medicine, and essential services. So this is one of the biggest migration crises that's not due to war, like the Syrian refugee crisis. Um, and it's hard to tell the exact number of Venezuelans that have fled because a lot of them have migrated illegally. So this is just according to kind of official and estimated numbers. And unfortunately, the U.S. put sanctions on Venezuela, which doesn't help. It actually makes them more dependent on China and Russia. And so currently, Colombia, Peru, and Ecuador are the main destination for migrants, which puts extreme pressure on recipient countries, especially in employment, education, and health. These recipient countries have increased regulations for border entry, and hostility has definitely increased as well, especially in Peru. So with Maduro versus Guaido, in 2018, a lot of people were contesting the election results that put Maduro in power. They're saying that those were rigged. And under the Venezuelan constitution, Guaido named himself the legitimate leader of Venezuela. So there's definitely been a lot of political tensions between them, with their own allies trying to put the other one out of power or overthrow and put their ally in power. And as of recently, there was a failed plan to overthrow Maduro, which left 8 dead mercenaries and 2 captured American ex-soldiers. So obviously the plan did not work at all. And currently about 90% of the population lives below poverty line. So Baraguachan is one of the main exits for Venezuelans fleeing the country. In addition to lack of food and medicine, there's also a shortage of doctors. So we see an increase of deaths as well as diseases. And currently the IMF sees Venezuelan inflation at 10 million percent. So these figures are a little bit old, and since the situation is constantly changing, but just to give an idea, so the infant mortality rate rose to 26%, which is about 100,000 live births. Venezuela has the second highest homicide rate in Latin America and in the Caribbean, so it's extremely dangerous right now. And Venezuelans lost an average of 10 kilos in 2017, of course, due to lack of food, like it shows in this photo. No hay comida, and then these are the Venezuelan people protesting that they believe that Maduro is a dictator. So just a little bit more about the current crisis situation. So the health and quality of life for the remaining citizens in Venezuela is put at high risk. The number of malaria cases increased by 359% between 2000 and 2015, and a further 71% in 2017. So what's sad about this is that the migrants leaving the country, of course not all, but many, they will bring these diseases, in this case malaria, to the recipient countries. I read that there was quite a few cases of malaria in these recipient countries, as well as measles. And in 2018, 82% of people in Venezuela, about 28.5 million people, and 75% of health centers around the country did not have a continuous supply of water, according to a report from 5 non-governmental organizations in Venezuela. It's very hard to get actual figures since the Maduro regime is not keeping track of these things, nor are they releasing those kind of figures since they refuse to believe that there's an actual crisis in Venezuela. And between 2016 and 2018, the proportion of the population that is malnourished increased from 5% to 12%. Again, this is from reports from 3 Venezuelan NGOs. And here, this is like one source of water that people are using to get water from. Unfortunately, this water is not filtered at all, or not even necessarily safe to drink, and it's creating a lot of diseases and health problems, and as well as giving them diarrhea. And last year, and I think it was around maybe October, November, Maduro ordered a 67% increase in Venezuela's monthly minimum wage. The new hike might actually have a more negative effect as it threatens to refuel hyperinflation after restrictive monetary policies help slow the pace of price increases in 2019. So just some context of the crisis. So I believe these are figures from 2017, and this is in 2019, just to show how quickly the crisis worsens. So in Colombia, and I believe this is 2017, there was 870,093 migrants, and in 2019 there was 1.3 million. In Brazil, 50,000, and now, well, obviously there's more, but from these figures, 168,000. And also to show the main destinations that they're going to, even in Spain they're traveling, or the US or Canada. So, but in Spain of 2017 there was around 208,000, and in 2019 there was still around 208,000. So you can definitely tell that the recipient countries are definitely having a great influx of migrants, while these countries that are farther away, like the US 290 and 290 here, they're not having such a great influx of migrants. So just to talk about the crisis issue, so Venezuela is not only the largest migrant crisis, but also the most underfunded crisis in modern history. So just to give a comparison, $7.4 billion was spent on Syrian refugee crisis, and only $580 million has gone towards the Venezuelan crisis. So limited funding is a key issue for all agencies in the region and creates reliance on a main donor, the United States. A 2020 appeal for $1.35 billion, which was funds for humanitarian relief as well as long-term social and economic inclusion, was asked, but of course not all the money, not nearly all that money was given. So the crisis also receives little help from the international community. Most of the help is from the regional countries and NGOs, as well as some international ones and international governments, but not nearly receives as much attention as the Syrian refugee crisis, just to give a comparison. And countries in the region have created imposed barriers to entry, which, of course, what this creates is, a lot of Venezuelans are desperate to flee the country and migrate to other ones. And so it puts them in poor conditions and more open discrimination, or just more vulnerable situations where people will take advantage of the desperation that they have in wanting to flee the country. So just some of the regional responses. Into September of 2018, the Quito Declaration on Human Mobility of Venezuelan Citizens in the region was an important first step in organizing the regional response. This was signed by Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, Ecuador, Mexico, Panama, Paraguay, Peru, and Uruguay. So many of these host countries either ended or quietly failed to renew their special visa programs. So what this has resulted in is thousands of Venezuelan migrants moving through the region illegally, which of course creates rising discontent. Now these are just a couple of the cases. There's so many, unfortunately. So in Panama, I saw a case where a flyer circulated around local bars and restaurants offering a 50% discount to customers who punched a Venezuelan in the face, and in Brazil, citizens of border towns attacked refugee camps in August. So this is just one specific case. In Brazil, a Brazilian man holding a sign that says "We won't be another Venezuela," to show his discontent for the growing influx of migrants entering the country. So just regional responses continued. So many regional countries are ignoring the Cartagena Declaration of 1984. It was created in an academic colloquium in, of course, Cartagena, and it was a document with different policies and actions on refugees' protections in Latin America, setting a regional approach to refugee protection divided by 3 parts. So the migration crisis in Venezuela meets 3 of the Cartagena criteria, such as generalized violence, massive violations of human rights, and other circumstances that would disrupt public order. And under the Quito process, in Colombia, the plan is allocating 55% of the funds for directed emergency assistance, while in Peru, socioeconomic and cultural integration is a greater priority, with only 36% of funds allocated for direct emergency assistance. So in Peru, about 75% say they are opposed and afraid of Venezuelan migration. They're requiring a humanitarian visa for migrants, making it a requirement that they have a valid passport and a list of other documentations. Now they're stating this as a security measure. So migration plummeted after the visa went into effect onto June 15th. I believe this was either of 2019 or 18. So they used to have a peak of 9,000 migrants entering Peru daily to about 450 people a day. So definitely a decrease. And in Chile, they're implementing a similar policy that required migrants to have a valid passport and a residency visa as a way to cut back on Venezuelans arriving with tourist visas. One of the resulting consequences for Venezuelan migrants after these new policies were implemented was that hundreds of Venezuelan families have been left stranded in poor conditions on the Peru-Chile border for at least a month. So only worsening the situation for the poor migrants. And just some of the sources of funding. Now this is from 2009. So an appeal was made, this is in US dollars, for $737.6 million. Only $389.1 million was given, and the unmet requirements are $348.5 million. And there was a lot of sources for funding. I'm showing the main ones here. Of course, the main donor is the U.S., funding about $292,000 or 75.1% of the budget. And then after is the European Commission. This isn't specified. Then the Canadian and the German government. And then, of course, we see these NGOs such as Mercy Corps, UNICEF Brazil, Spanish Red Cross, World Vision, but of course the main donor is the U.S. So as far as funds raised, so we can see here in the regional, so 195,000 people are targeted in the regional, 6.2 million is allocated, and the majority of that is funded by the UNHCR. And in Colombia, the target population is 63,000. Of course, where money is allocated to Colombia, that's the most affected. And UNICEF is the biggest contributor of money, as well as in the other regions. And you can also see the different NGOs, like what percentage of funds they're contributing. And these are the main countries in the region that are being allocated funds. And this is just a chart showing the migrant response plan, target population, and funding by country. So in Brazil, they're targeting, this is by the UNHCR, 150,000. Colombia, significantly higher, 940,000. So refugees that are not covered in Brazil, that's 85,000. Colombia, 475,000. The financial requirements to reach the targeted population is 56 million in Brazil, 350 million in Colombia. 6% of funds needed in Brazil is 28%, in Colombia 55%. So the refugees that are not covered, it's over 1 million, and the financial requirements for the whole region is 686 million, so quite a bit of money. On March 1st of 2019, the UN Security Council voted on 2 resolutions related to aid for Venezuela, but it failed to pass either of the 2 resolutions because the US, China, and Russia could not reach an agreement over the issue. This is due to a clash between who the countries recognize as the official leader of Venezuela, with the U.S. recognizing Juan Guaido, and of course Russia and China recognizing Maduro as they are his allies. So just a little bit about the funds raised. I thought it was very interesting to see that the UNHCR has been significantly successful in receiving the funds that they appeal for, so they're more effective, and this is just comparing the UNHCR with the IOM. Of course, this starts at 0, goes to 3,500,000, and here this starts at 0 and goes to 14 million. So they're definitely it's just interesting to see which organizations are able to get the funds that they ask for and which ones aren't as successful. So just wanted to provide that. And just for the use of funds, again, there was so many different plans or organizations, but just to give an idea of what that money's or what their plan for the money is. So this one, Action Against Hunger with the European Commission. They want to have an integrated and comprehensive multi-sectoral emergency response to the most vulnerable populations, so Peru and Colombia. So they have a commitment of over 1 million. In Colombia with the UNHCR, they want to have capacity building for asylum and migration. So about 1,000 for that. In the UNHCR in Colombia again, for the Venezuela situation, about 15,000. And so just different sectors of what they plan to use the money for. So the biggest sector is the direct emergency assistance. So they required 333.8 million. Only 87.5 million was funded. So that's about a coverage of 26.2%. And the second biggest sector is socioeconomic and cultural integration, with a requirement of 220.9 million. Only 27 was funded, covering only 12.2%. So the biggest coverage is going towards protection assistance currently. So I wanted to give a specific case of how migration has affected one country, and since Colombia is the country most affected, I wanted to do that. So in 2018, in February, Colombia requested UN support to humanitarian needs. So before, a lot of people would immigrate from Colombia, but now people are traveling to the country and staying there. Like I said, a lot of people would emigrate from Colombia to Venezuela, but now it's the opposite. So there's a growing competition for jobs and lack of resources. So this, of course, creates rising tensions between Colombians and Venezuelans, as Venezuelans are willing to accept illegally low-paying jobs, and this affects like a wide variety of jobs. I even read a case about prostitution, that sadly these Venezuelan women have to resort themselves to become prostitutes, and they'll accept extremely low wages, which is putting these Colombian prostitutes out of business because they can't compete with the low wages that the Venezuelan prostitutes are accepting. And the Colombian government has launched 230 million in areas with high refugee concentrations to help with infrastructure and integration. Of course, there's been a lot of backlash. Mobs have attacked Venezuelan migrants and protested in front of refugee camps. And Colombia says it needs 1.5 billion a year. Ecuador about 550 million, and the World Bank estimated the influx can shave off about 0.4% of Colombia's gross domestic product. So just continuing with that, so Venezuelan migrants would definitely put a big strain on state finances in Colombia, with the fiscal deficit to widen by 0.6 percentage points and increasing the overall debt to GDP ratio by a cumulative 2.2 percentage points. But Colombia has been the most open regarding their borders. They even issued a border mobility card allowing Venezuelans to travel freely, and had a special state permit for Venezuelans who arrived between July and December 2018. But of course, with this COVID-19 crisis, or I should say pandemic, it's with the borders closed, it certainly affected a lot of these Venezuelan migrants hoping to flee Venezuela and enter these recipient countries. So just about some humanitarian action, I got this from the USAID webpage. You can see all these NGOs and what they are doing in these different countries. For Colombia, we have, this is Colombia, yeah, Mercy Corps, WFP, UNICEF, UNHCR, NRC, and what they're planning to do in the country, as well as in Peru, Argentina, Brazil, Venezuela. And the IOM is in coordination with the UNHCR, and they've been supporting governments through, this was from the IOM webpage, so healthcare and food, family reunification, socioeconomic and cultural integration, preventing xenophobia, assistance to survivors of gender-based violence and trafficking, things like that, as well as healthcare and food. And the World Bank and Inter-American Development Bank have actually opened up financing to Venezuelan hosts to provide or help with public sector. So the World Bank actually encouraged Peru to implement a multi-sector response to help with better integration and reduce discrimination. And finally, last year in 2019, Maduro finally allowed the Red Cross into Venezuela to deliver aid to citizens. So this is from the crisis group's page. It's just some of the different solutions that they feel like could help along with negotiations. There's more in the next slide, which I'll show in a minute. But negotiations have taken place since 2014. The last series of talks was between May to August 2019 in Oslo and Barbados, facilitated by the Norwegian government. Now the talks collapsed in September since the Venezuelan government was unwilling to compromise. Also in 2019, 16 governments from Latin America agreed to activate the Rio Treaty, which implemented economic and political measures against targeted members of the Maduro regime. So just going back, so here for the possible solutions to tackling negotiation, they believe that you should have short-term reductions of tensions or a more level electoral playing field. Parliamentary elections to be held as scheduled in late 2020, phase sanctions relief as conditions improve, and political guarantees with the UN role in assisting the monitoring implementation of an accord. So these are, of course, there's so many possible solutions, but this was just one recommendation from the crisis group that I'd seen. So this is just recommendations from the Human Rights Watch. They have so many recommendations for different groups, like the Venezuelan government, for the different regional governments. But I just included the two that I thought were interesting. So they believe that they recommend that the UN Security Council should regularly meet to address Venezuela's humanitarian crisis, request and discuss all reports, resolutions, document the violations to the rights to health and food in Venezuela, and urge Venezuelan authorities to release disease or epidemiological food security and nutrition data that would help these agencies. And the recommendation that they had for the UN Security General, Antonio Guterres, is that he should publicly acknowledge that Venezuela is facing a complex humanitarian crisis, make clear to Venezuela's leadership that it's responsible for ensuring that the UN can implement a humanitarian response, designate the ERC, and ensure the implementation of a UN-led large-scale humanitarian response there. So just wanted to provide that, again, from the Human Rights Watch. And as far for the future, so there definitely needs to be a solution politically, since you can't have one or two people competing to have the presidency, so you definitely need more outside help from countries. Someone needs to step down or assume the presidency. The region definitely lacks coordination within countries on how to handle the growing number of migrants, and they need more aid. So overall, I believe more of an effort is needed during the migration crisis, especially since there are ongoing issues with little improvements. And with the case of Venezuela, migrants in Latin American countries need a lot more help in order to stop the whole region from destabilizing and falling victim to the crisis. As you can see here, people are asking for a free Venezuela, people are in hunger, and more people are recognizing Juan Guaido as the official leader rather than Maduro. And that's it, and these are my sources. And again, my name is Nicole Brown, and I hope you enjoyed my presentation.